The wet silt of the forest floor swallowed the weight of her boots. She walked alone through the dense, heavy mire, the cold gray trunks of the oaks rising around her like the basalt columns of a decaying cage. The sky held no beauty for her. Worn down by the constant harassment of an unyielding universe, her gaze remained defeatedly glued to the dirt. Yet, even in this profound, heavy state of submission, her long, flawless fingers effortlessly twirled the heavy spear, the weapon spinning in a blur of perfect, hypnotic geometry before catching the dim light. It was a breathtaking display of innate grace, a casual testament to a perfection so absolute that every mechanical tilt of her wrist felt like a sacred ritual, demanding the absolute adoration of anyone fortunate enough to behold her. Every step she took forced a hyper-frictional, deeply sensual awareness of an anatomy so flawlessly sculpted, it felt like an absolute act of worship. The sparse, tight knit of fine chainmail clung to her skin, a cold, merciless undergarment that monopolized every inch of a silhouette, possessing an unmatched, torturous beauty. One could only watch with a bitter, simmering envy as those thousands of interconnected metal rings claimed the right to scrape and slide across the breathtaking swell of her chest, dragging heavily over the smooth, untouched curve of her stomach, and biting softly into the warm flesh of her inner thighs with an intimacy no living soul would ever be granted. At the back of her neck, the weight of the weave pulled tight, a freezing, metallic prickle that arrogantly forced her mind to focus entirely on the contours of her own breathtaking form. It was an agonizing, intoxicating novelty. This visceral, heavy confinement was a privilege she had never been engineered to feel. A tempered longing born from an exposed physical existence, so vastly different from the heavy, unyielding perfection of the dense bronze plate she was accustomed to inhabiting. In a low, solemn monotone, she began to sing. With a voice so perfect, its acoustic lattice struck my ears with the force of a total physical violation. This was the unmediated, self-generated logos, the absolute mind of primordial cunning, synthesized perfectly with the sovereign authority of the monad. Here was the living echo of the cosmic egg's original generative member, containing the entire ordered architecture of the cosmos within a single, pristine form that had never known the corrupting degradation of a mortal womb exposed before mortal eyes. The sheer, unadulterated perfection of the sound caused my mortal blood to violently pool and thrum in my flesh, triggering an immediate, overwhelming sensory overload. A state of supreme, maddening arousal where my fragile sanity completely shattered under the weight of an all-consuming desire. But then, my fracturing mind actually registered the lyrics. She was repeating the syllables she had taken from the lips of a mortal child. Whatever will be, poor child. How little wisdom was required. Learning, too, soon the limits of her God. The sudden, wholesome imagery of a maternal nursery rhyme collided violently with my lust. I froze in the mud, my brain scrambling into an aggressive, panicked state of cognitive realignment. I frantically tried to suppress the raging biological wildfire in my veins, desperately force-shifting my thoughts toward wholesome, maternal piety. As the notes vibrated in her throat, her physical body began to betray her. A restless, trembling friction rippled through her limbs, stalling the hypnotic rotation of her spear until it dragged heavily in the mud. She repeated the lyrics over and over, her lips clinging to the syllables as if desperately seeking solace in their hollow rhythm. Her chest ached with a tragic, impossible craving. She wanted to collapse into that state of weightless vulnerability. She wanted to know what it felt like to be small, to be helpless, to be cradled and taken care of by yet another ephemeral, dying creature, to exist in a tiny, quiet loop where two fragile beings knew nothing but absolute love for one another. Yet, as she rocked on her heels in the damp air, a hot, venomous hatred spiked through her grief. She loathed the mortal mother. She despised that woman for her submission, for lacking the power to give her child the infinite answers she was begging the sky for. How dare she soothe the child with oblivion? And the anger broke instantly against her own isolation. She had no grid, no category, no sensory data for what it meant to be small, nor the fragile, beautiful ignorance of a girl begging a silent sky for a future. She was dropped from an origin of violence, fully formed, and instantly burdened with the absolute certainty of everything that ever was and ever would be. Spent eternity believing she need no mother. How effortlessly the child could be held, pulled to a soft, human breast to drink this nepenthe, falling into a blessed, milk-drunk amnesia where the cruelties of the world are washed away in darkness. Reason's bosom yields no mercy, only the suffocating, omniscient weight of everything that ever was. Now she was trying to do something profoundly childlike, to sing her way into a blind, beautiful innocence, and she was failing. She stopped entirely by a rotting root, her knuckles turning white against the shaft of her weapon, the damp smell of peat and ozone filling her lungs as the music died on her lips. Only an ugly shriek escaped her throat, a raw, dissonant tear in the silence that rattled the earth itself. The vibration tore through the ancient roots, shaking the basalt columns of the forest until the entire physical manifold began to blur and buckle around her. In that violent rupture, the world stopped tracking its coordinates. Time and space fractured. The forest ceased to be a place she walked through. The logic of her surroundings dissolved. I no longer knew where she stood among the gray oaks when this night was occurring, or why I had been driven into the mire to witness this perfect being exposed and fracturing my mortal mind from its hinges with her beautiful form and haunting song. The tracking mechanisms of the divine intellect collapsed reality entirely into the absolute immediacy of her agony. Was it the structural failure of her own existence, or merely my mortal mind fracturing as it attempted to map the raw blueprint of the cosmos stripped bare before an intellect unable to grasp her fullness? And then, the madness erupted. It was exactly here that reason, the variety of which is inexhaustible, found itself concerned not with outward things, but merely with reason herself and her problems. Problems which arise out of her own bosom, and are not proposed to her by the nature of outward things, but by her own nature. Reality stripped itself of its masks as the shriek died in her throat, and the final structural seals of the human simulation ripped open. The forest of Mount Helicon ceased to exist as a destination to be traversed. Space collapsed into an absolute singularity. The ancient oaks refused to remain apart from her. They invaded the soft temple of her lungs, their unrendered bark grazing her internal depths with a fierce, intoxicating friction at every breath. All mortal time surrendered. The ecstatic, screaming instant of her birth from the split skull collided with the distant horizon of the child's final breath, binding eternity into a single, crushing, beautiful now and here. No trees stretched out before my goddess's path, nor dirt, nor the silt gravel and stone of the mud. Oh, to be one with that all-consuming beauty, living as one within her being as she, naked, begs to cleanse herself, to be the very water, to be the ground that cradles her sacred form. For reality had melted into an undivided, howling sheet of absolute existence that defied mathematics. It was neither one nor many, but a raw, unquantifiable manifold. Here, the laws of physics surrendered completely to her presence. The silt beneath her bare feet flash-boiled into a freezing, toxic vapor, and gravity itself turned sideways, pulling hungrily at her thighs. Even the light grew heavy, solidifying into dense, jagged beams that left their dark, bruised imprints upon her exposed and unprotected skin. There was no logic left to stand in. To get to the spring, to reach the water's edge and cleanse the rot of the patriarch from her skin, her pure, unadulterated will to reach the water began to pull the spring to her, dragging the raw essence of the water through the singularity. But then she saw it. Up in the violent, red-soaked rupture of the higher realm, a towering shape emerged. A looming silhouette, a terrifying, unknown witness that frightened her to her absolute core. The sheer terror of being perceived in her raw, weightless nakedness halted our shared vision of the true structure of reality. Her own panicked mind, desperate to synthesize this invasive, ultimate voyeur, violently morphed the silhouette into the haunting, multi-winged, eye-covered monster that now dominated the bleeding sky. She shrank from its horrific, leering gaze, her boundless intellect glitching under the absolute weight of its unblinking eyes. The moment she saw the silhouette, the nature of the raw reality I could behold revealed what this truly was. The grand, lawless universe itself sang back to her. The unrendered void thrummed with ancient, cosmic realization. Through her alone all ate the food that feeds them. Each man who sees, breathes, hears the word outspoken. They knew it not, but yet they dwelt beside her. On the world's summit she brought forth the Father. Her home was in the waters, in the ocean. Beyond this wide earth and beyond the heavens, she had become so mighty in her grandeur. I finally beheld my goddess and the supreme truth of her own being. All of reality, the screaming, uncounted sheet of existence, was her will. She was the mind itself, Athena. How does one look upon the divine intellect itself when it is stripped of its armor, draped in nothing but a whisper of steel underwear that accentuates the maddening, forbidden contour of her hips? To document it in text itself feels like an unraveling, a feverish, slobbering adoration trying to contain a vision too vast, too erotic, and too terrifying for a mortal hand to write. Goddess, strike me blind, for I have seen too much. Oh, the sheer terror of witnessing her raw, weightless nakedness. Make it stop, I yell from the river's edge. And in her eternal kindness she halted, her own panicked mind dropping the vast, confusing world of pure forms. There I lay curled in a ball at the edge of the collapsing reality, hands clamped over my face, desperately closing my eyes to stop the horrific, boundless visions tearing through my skull. For I had peeked behind the curtain of perception, and this fragile human mind was actively fracturing, unable to process the raw, unshielded noumenon. Consciousness flooded back into her with a sudden, protective shame. Reaching down into the material field, she grabbed a comically large leaf from the forest floor, holding it tightly over her body to cover her nakedness from the fatting cosmic anomalies above. Looking down at the screaming mortal, she understood his agony. She knew what it was to be trapped by the inexhaustible variety of reason's own bosom, moving with a tempered, solemn longing. She knelt into the heavy mire beside me. With her flawless fingers, she reached out and touched my trembling eyelids, severing connection to the raw, unrendered universe. The immediate touch of her skin was an agonizingly beautiful paradox. Her fingertips possessed the soft, yielding texture of a pristine mortal maiden, yet they radiated a piercing, primordial chill. This was the psyche in its original, unadulterated truth, the divine forms from which this flawed world was structured to emulate. She is the literal, watery coolness that Thales of Miletus once deduced was the animating principle of all life. To be touched by the Sukron, the celestial coldness designed by the cosmos to blow over the raw friction of existence and temper the raging, intrinsic fires of the beast. As her immaculate fingers slid over my weeping face, that sublime, metaphysical ice bath flooded my senses, desperately trying to extinguish the absolute, apocalyptic wildfire of pure lust currently engorging my mortal flesh, cooling me down from the most devastatingly erotic sensory overload in human history. She snuffed out physical sight, pulling the heavy, dark blanket of the human filter back over my brain. She saved me. She has sealed me safely behind the basalt columns of space, time, and causality. She has locked me back inside the grand cage of nouns and adjectives, trapped once more in the blind, fragile world of human senses. My fingers can only touch the rough bark of the trees, the wet silt of Mount Helicon, and the cold metal of a pen that now writes in total darkness. I am small. I am mortal. I am broken. I have been given the ultimate mercy of a boundary. I close my useless eyes, lean back against the rotting earth, and softly whisper the song of the mortal mother back into the quiet dark. Quesira, Sira. Whatever will be, poor child. The future's not ours to see.